People want justice. You can't get justice when a loved one gets killed.
Correct.
You cannot get justice. You might get a pound of flesh, but that's not justice.
I don't call it Safety Act. I call it the Unsafety Act because that's what it is. I'm still waiting for somebody to explain to me where does safety come in? Who are we keeping safe here when you call it the Safety Act?
When the Department of Justice came to Chicago, the press came to me and said, well, what do you think they're going to find when they do their investigation? I said they're going to find systemic racism, poor training, and poor supervision. And they said, well, why do you say that? I said, because that's what they found in the other 25 investigations that they did during this administration. You know what I'd like those legislators to do? Is explain to Krystal Rivera's 10-year-old daughter, I believe, why this guy is going to be out in 2 years. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Wearing the Badge. I'm Garry McCarthy, and tonight we're going to talk about something called the Safety Act, and it's the first of a three-part series that we're going to do. In short, the Safety Act was something that was enacted in the state of Illinois in 2021. Actually, that's when I was on my time out from policing for a little while, before I got back in the game, as we say. And it's a state law which really kind of restricts and takes away a lot of the privileges and things that the police could do, while at the same time, it makes it much easier for criminals not to get prosecuted. And it's troubling because obviously we're concerned about crime. That's what we do. We're law enforcement. With me tonight, I have Marc Maton. Marc is about to retire. He's 29 years in the Illinois State Police, and then 10 years, right, in Lemont. I'll let him fill in some gaps about himself. And with me also is Tom Herion. Tom is a friend of mine. He's held a bunch of different positions. We're not going to tell the people outside that you work for Homeland Security, right? We'll see you up on a flick. But where? Tonight, there's a protest outside regarding ICE running through Chicago while at the same time. So go ahead, Marc, a little bit more about yourself.
So the only thing I would add is I'm the immediate past president of the Illinois Chiefs, but more importantly, in my role with the Illinois Chiefs since 2014, I've been leading their legislative effort, and I'm the chairman of their legislative committee, and I've been involved with all the bills as they get spun up in negotiating the position of the Chiefs with those bills, and that was really what my relationship and responsibility with the Safety Act.
So I had one of those jobs also. When I was with the Major City Chiefs Association, Rahm Emanuel called me during one of our conferences, and I went out in the hallway to answer the phone, and when I came back in, I was the vice president of the Major City Chiefs Association. It was a lesson learned, but it was a lot of fun to do that. Tom has held a number of different positions in a number of different places. He was an agent. He was a supervising agent. I think you were secret agent too, weren't you?
Started out as in local law enforcement. I was a patrolman. I was a detective. I was in the Illinois State Police Task Force for Narcotics. I worked with Marc, as a matter of fact, during that period of time. I rose to chief of police, and then after 9/11, I went on with the Department of Homeland Security as a supervisory special agent until they wanted to transfer me to Washington, D.C., and then I went to work for the city of Chicago as an assistant commissioner in charge of police, fire, and public safety at both airports. Remained there, and now I'm the chief of police in Lyons. I've been there about 7 years.
2018, right?
2018 came on. I've taught college. I taught at Robert Morris University, graduate school and undergrad. It's been a long but a very good career.
Well, I purposely didn't talk about your educations, either one of you, because mine isn't as good as yours.
Cool, that I do, Garry, but
I figured since it's my show, I'm going to do it. But seriously, this is a very important topic. This is the first episode. We're talking to police at this point. We're going to talk to prosecutors, and I really want to talk to legislators who were behind the doors when these things were happening, because my understanding, and like I said, it was during my time out from policing, was there was basically a handshake deal that was made in Springfield behind closed doors between a couple of politicians. Elected officials. And it was about power grab for a couple of people. And unfortunately, the people who jumped into the seat to drive this thing got it rolling. It was the cobbling together, if you will, of a whole bunch of different attitudes and thoughts about policing. But we're going to go through a number of them here tonight, and Mark is the subject matter expert here, and Tom can fill us in on things, how it affects us on the street, how it affects us for prosecutions. But, ironically, you can't make up how this stuff seems to happen. One of the things that has me completely outraged about this bill is the fact that they took away something called felony murder. And for the uninformed, felony murder is if you steal a car and you run over somebody with a car, right? You're in a stolen car. Because you committed a felony while somebody dies that you have a direct contact to, you get charged with felony murder. And the reason why I'm so outraged about it is because we're 4 days since the death of Krystal Rivera. And Krystal Rivera, by now, I'm sure everybody's going to know who she is. She was a police officer here in the 6th District in Chicago. And her and her partner chased a guy who they thought had a gun into an apartment. When they got into the apartment, the guy levels a rifle at them. And in the chaos, Krystal's partner fires a shot. Unfortunately, it hits Krystal and she passes away. That's right out of the handbook of felony murder. If that guy doesn't point the rifle at them when they come through the door, Krystal Rivera is alive today. And instead, this guy got charged with a number of really minor crimes. Possession of the rifle without a FOID card. I believe there were fake IDs and some drugs in the apartment. This guy is a convicted felon who I believe had 6 warrants when he was arrested, which leads to another question. Who was looking for this guy? If I was running a Comstat on this thing, somebody would be in a lot of trouble. You got a convicted felon with 6 warrants out there. Where? 82nd and Drexel. What goes on there? A lot. Somebody should have caught him with his shoes under the bed at 5 a.m. with a warrant enforcement. That didn't happen. It's outrageous. It's a direct result of the Safety Act that felony murder statute was repealed. And it's unconscionable. Think about the family of 5 who gets hit by a stolen car. Think about that. And think about, and you know what? Here's something else. I hate buzzwords. I hate things like we're laser focused, right? One of the ones that I hate is people want justice. You can't get justice when a loved one gets killed. Correct. You cannot get justice. You might get a pound of flesh, but that's not justice. And I mean, I can kind of relate to this, so forgive me for kind of ranting a little bit because, and I said this on the show before, if you sell fentanyl in this day and age, there is a 100% chance that you're going to kill somebody. A 100% chance. And as I've told you on the show, I lost my daughter in May 29th of 2022 to fentanyl poison. Now, I don't even want to talk about the border. I don't know if she would be alive if the border was closed, but I know she's not, and she's not here. So I had to just get that off my chest. And I'll never get justice because the guy who sold the fentanyl is never going to get caught. You're right. If he's in this country, which who the hell knows at this point. So inside the Safety Act, and I'm going to turn this over to you, Mark, there are a number of things. No cash bail was one of them. Enormous amounts of training for police. Training is good. I don't want anybody to think that we think that training is bad. Training's really good. But they say it's free. No, it's not. And we have budgets. Right now I'm running a small police department in the suburbs, and when I take an officer out of a car to send them to training, guess what? I got to put one in the car on overtime. And I think just to do our annual up to snuff for the Safety Act was costing me about $4,000 per officer in the first quarter of last year. But that's free. Don't forget about it. And what does that do to a budget like Chicago when you got 11, 12,000 police officers? So that's just a little bit to kind of set the table for you, Mark. Boy, that's a lot to set the table for you.
Sure. So to give you some context about how this whole act spun up, we went through the summer of George Floyd and the death of George Floyd and the civil unrest. Near the end of that summer, we started having conversations with who became the eventual sponsors of the Safety Act about eliminating qualified immunity, which was a big concern of ours. The mandatory body cameras and training, that really was about it. Sometime in early fall, the Black Caucus put out a statement of police reform needs. They had lifted what had been a national kind of effort and the things that they constituted police reform. So through the fall of 20, they held a number of public hearings that we participated in, and we testified at those. And it turned into late November, a bill was dropped that had components of what eventually became the Safety Act, although that language never made it. We were able to convince a number of legislators that qualified immunity was really a federal construct, that they couldn't
describe qualified immunity.
So qualified immunity,
I don't know what it is.
Basically it means that you can't hold an officer liable for future changes in the law. So let's say an example of dog sniffs. If they were to say tomorrow that a canine search is an illegal search, you couldn't go back to officers and say, for the last 3 years, you've done these searches. Now you're liable. And it really had nothing to do with use of force liability or tort law at the state level. And they understood that, and that derailed that. We were able to kill that bill and push the discussions to the spring of 21 session. And that's where we thought we were as we fast forward into January of the lame duck session. And like you mentioned then, because of some unrelated political needs that were going to be votes as the new General Assembly started, there was a backroom deal made to allow a police reform bill on the last day of that lame duck session, almost without reservation. And they cobbled in all these things out there. There'd been all these bills put in for the last 3 or 4 years previous to that never made it out of committee because they were so extreme. And that's why you see all these dozens of unrelated concepts go into this Safety Act, and it's 711 pages that gets passed on January 6th or 7th
in the middle of the night, right?
21 at 3 a.m. that becomes the Safety Act. And as we're trying to unpack this, we realize that that not only was this bill detrimental to crime fighting, really wasn't against the police. It was bad for the citizens of Illinois. It had been so poorly written with non-jurisprudence terms and with an ambiguity that it needed to be fixed. And over the next couple of weeks, the legislators realized very quickly that was the case, and that's how we started this round of trailer bills. But we were at a disadvantage to those negotiations. They weren't like a normal bill negotiation where you're trying to come up with a comprehensive.
They wanted to check a box and say that the police were involved in this. But didn't they get it like that afternoon, the 700 pages?
Yeah, it was introduced.
It was introduced at like 4 o'clock.
Before midnight, yeah.
Yeah, all right. No, and at 3, nobody read it. No. Right. Wonderful. That's how we govern the state of Illinois. Isn't that great?
And the inability to keep our victims safe. The thing, I don't call it the Safety Act. I call it the Unsafety Act because that's what it is. There's nothing. I'm still waiting for somebody to explain to me where does safety come in? Who are we keeping safe here when you call it the Safety Act?
This reminds me so much of what happened in Chicago when I was the superintendent after the Laquan McDonald shooting. When the Department of Justice came to Chicago, the press came to me and said, well, what do you think they're going to find when they do their investigation? I said they're going to find systemic racism, poor training, and poor supervision. And I said, well, why do you say that? I said, because that's what they found in the other 25 investigations that they did during this administration. And the systemic racism, I got to give them credit. When they did the investigation in Puerto Rico, they found that the Puerto Rican police were discriminating against Dominicans. Other than that, it said something different every place else. And the way that they did that was they would come to town with their conclusions. They would take testimony and then say, aha, it's true. We got you. So at the same time, Rahm Emanuel had Lori Lightfoot commission a board, police accountability review, something or other. And Lori called me over and over again and asked me if I would come in and talk. And I was like, Lori, what do you want from me? I mean, nobody's going to listen anyway. She says, I just think that you should lend your voice to this. I said, okay, but we're going to need a lot of time because you don't know what was going on inside CPD, all the reforms that we put in place. So I'm going to come down there, but it's going to take us a long time. It's going to take probably a week or so of me just sitting down with everybody. She said, okay. I came down. I spent about 2 hours talking to them. I said, okay, we're going to follow up? Yeah, we're going to follow up. They put it out that week. They put it out that very week and said that I had contributed to it. I mean, in this case, the legislators, politicians put together a bill and shoved it down the police's throat. And we're trying to fight it off the whole time. And that's really
and they had the
battle.
opportunity. And that's why so many of these concepts like the felony murder rule modification was done. It had nothing to do with police reform. Bail reform had nothing to do with police reform. Expungement of criminal histories had nothing to do with police reform. There was a number of things in there that had nothing to do, but they were all added in. And, then we had to spend the next really 18 months trying to negotiate language to make it able to be implemented properly. And with those conversations, we agreed from the beginning that we couldn't change the core pillar concepts of the police reform. It was just a procedural modification so that what was in the bill is legal terminology. I'll give you just one quick example. They put in for our use of force, they introduced a concept called serious body injury. And it's always been great bodily harm. And in our early discussions with them, they said, well, it means the same thing. What are you guys complaining about? And they said, it doesn't mean the same thing. There's decades of jurisprudence describing what that means. And if you want to mean great bodily injury, let's just say great bodily injury. Yeah. And so all that was changed. So, the use of force things that were put into place in the Safety Act were almost all modified till it was able to be acted upon and learned and implemented by the police, and that was our goal with the Safety Act. We were going to eradicate what had been changed in that early morning deals
of fait accompli. And by the way, I know it was signed in the middle of the night, but didn't they get it like that afternoon? The 700 page.
Yeah, it was introduced.
It was introduced.
Yeah,
at like 4 o'clock
before midnight. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. No. And at 3, nobody read it. No. Right. Wonderful. That's how we govern the state of Illinois. Isn't that correct? And I'm sorry, I get upset.
And we haven't fixed it all.
No.
Yeah, it's like, we did 3 trailer bills and then there was a loss of appetite really to do more. In late 23, they commissioned an implementation task force to review how it's being implemented so far. It's really a stall tactic to get beyond these last November elections. That report came out right after the elections. We're still kind of tweaking, that report, but it was just a stall tactic to get. We have actually, during this session, started negotiating Trailer Bill 4, which is a procedural due process fix to the decertification section. And then Trailer Bill 5 wasn't ready. The state's attorneys still are trying to fix the procedural implementation of PFA, but they're not going to be substantial changes in either of those cases.
And again, just for the audience, you could be decertified if you turn off your body camera, before the end of an event.
Class 3 felony. You could be arrested.
Arrested, fired. Think about that.
That's
It-
amazing.
it's-
I can't get a Class 3 felony approved. And now they want to charge police officers. Well, as a body cam.
New state's attorney. I think you can.
No, we can't. Eileen Burke is doing the right thing.
Well, you know what? But you have to think about the fact that Chicago had Kim Foxx that wouldn't prosecute anybody except cops.
Correct.
Right? And including Jesse Smollett. And then at the same time, we had this going on, which is limiting our ability to do our job and putting us more in danger. And I always wonder about this. You know, this came up. Who are the world famous criminologists who sat down with the state of Illinois and came up with all of these concepts that you should push down on policing? Did they do the same thing for doctors? Right? Did they go out and legislate how doctors should operate? When a plumber comes to your house, do you tell him what pipes to use, what to do, an
It's
electrician?
really Chicago, New York, Gary. Those are the two major cities that are enacted these type of provisions.
You had to go into New York.
I had to bring it to New York. I'm sorry.
It's almost 20 years.
I know.
Can't hold the account.
They didn't change it until you left, though. That was
The statute of limitations has expired.
Well, like many things, there's components in there that if we had done it the proper way, I agree that there needs to be some process to get rid of bad cops. I mean, there needs to be a process and having bad cops jump from department to department. So, we would have supported that concept. It just needed to go about the right way of making sure there's due process and that they're not taking away more rights to the policemen, especially in their off-duty lives, than they would to the normal citizens. But a lot of these things that under the Safety Act, they were really from one-offs.
Yeah.
Like your felony murder rule, there was an incident up in Lake County where a concealed carry victim that was being carjacked,
Yeah.
he shot and killed one of the assailants, and they wanted to make sure that one arrestee couldn't be charged with another arrestee his murder because it was indirect. So they modified that. So there's still a felony murder rule in Illinois, but what they've done is change it from proximate cause, which is indirect, to direct cause. It has to be the direct cause of those. But what we saw 4 days ago was the unintended consequences of that. Now police actions are considered indirect, and so it went too far. So I think the pendulum swung on a lot of those. They had unintended consequences of those, and maybe this will be the catalyst for the future to say, hey, maybe we went too far. Maybe that's not exactly what we meant to do, and let's keep this law to what we intended, and said that you can't hold one defendant for the death of another defendant.
I love the fact that you just used that phrase, unintended consequences, because previously it's been used against law enforcement to talk about things like the war on drugs, which, by the way, I think was a wholesale failure, right? Personal opinions, after almost 45 years in law enforcement, I always use this example. I have never met a heroin junkie who didn't do burglaries, right? So one of the strategies that we would use to reduce burglaries was to go to heroin sets early in the morning and make arrests for heroin possession. If they're in jail, they can't do a burglary that day, right?
broken window.
But the problem is this. By putting that guy or that girl in jail, we're not fixing anything. What we're doing is putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. And the unintended consequences of the war on drugs in the early 80s, I guess, during the crack epidemic.
Mid-80s. 85.
Mid-80s, yeah. Oh, I remember where it was. Now I got it. Was the breakup of the family unit, mass incarceration, arresting black fathers, taking them right out of the living rooms, right? That's what was always used as unintended consequences. So now you're using the phrase unintended consequences to look at the way that we're treating the police. It doesn't change anything, but it's the same concept, right? Tom, please.
Well, I'm going to tell you, you start talking about these issues and the things that are involved in the Safety Act and unintended consequences. The amount of litigation that's occurring now at these municipalities is tremendous. Everybody is. There's always a litigious world in law enforcement, but it is really ramping up more now since the Safety Act, and we're seeing it with the increase in crime and the inability to keep our victims safe. The thing, I don't call it the Safety Act, I call it the Unsafety Act, because that's what it is. There's no. I'm still waiting for somebody to explain to me where does safety come in. Who are we keeping safe here when you call it the Safety Act? Crime is on the rise. The recidivism rate is off the charts. We have had multiple occasions where somebody has been released on catch and release, I call it. Catch and release, they're arrested for burglary. They got out on catch and release. We caught them after doing another 70 burglaries. We just had one the other day. An individual was arrested 200 times. He was out on catch and release. And he had, as a matter of fact, he was on a electronic monitor. And he was in one of the flop house hotels. And we got a call of a rape. He was selling drugs, working prostitution on electronic monitoring. And there's no deterrent on what's going on as far as trying to stop those crimes from occurring. We had a burglary. I'm just throwing these things that are just completely ludicrous. We had an individual that did a smash and grab for a burglary, got into a car chase. And because of the time of the day, we chased him. And it was about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And we chased him into the city. And we caught him in the 1200 block of Mason, I believe. And the individual was taken into custody after a foot chase. One of our officers got hurt. This individual had been arrested on multiple occasions, should have been incarcerated. And he was on Chicago's most 10 wanted list, because I got a call from CPD telling me, how did you get this guy? The thing is with this catch and release, more victims are rising from them not being incarcerated. That crime and that victim should not be a victim if that person was incarcerated. And it's the recidivism rate and what is going on. I'm not even talking about the retail thefts that are just off the charts and killing businesses. I'm talking about the violent crime that's occurring. Now things have changed. You brought it up with Eileen O'Neill Burke. She is outstanding. I think she is doing a great job. And because unless the state's attorney's office petitions someone to be incarcerated, to be detained until their preliminary hearing, the judge has zero authority to hold them. I don't think people really understand that. If I'm the judge and I'm sitting there and this person just committed an armed robbery, and if the state's attorney does not petition for them to be held until the preliminary hearing, I have no authority to hold them, and they are free to walk, whether they're going to go on home monitoring or whatever it's going to be, which nobody's watching anyway. But what do they do when they get out? More crimes, more crimes, more crimes, more crimes. And it's so who are you protecting? Who is the Safety Act? Who are we trying to keep safe?
When a police officer in Chicago now unholsters their weapon, that's considered a use of force, and they have to do a report, right? So somebody tells me about this, and I'm like, so what's the big deal? Do the report. But it's being monitored so that if you take your gun out a whole bunch of times,
Exactly.
they're going to say, you are a violent racist.
They don't look at where you work, what district you're in, what crimes you're responding to.
Let's define what safety stands for, right? First thing is safety, right? Second thing is accountability. What's the F for? Transparency. And then F is transparency. I missed that at school. Yeah. I don't know.
Are you sure to get for terrible?
But out of the 5 letters or 6 letters, the first one is safety. The rest of them are protecting the rights of the accused.
They are.
And tightening up the screws on law enforcement.
And police don't want to do their jobs because they're being held to a level of, they're worried about, first of all, litigation. Second of all, and I just, from talking to some of the city guys, is in the city of Chicago, between the mayor and the superintendent, there's 7 layers
of oversight.
Before it gets to the superintendent to discipline officers for any type of perceived wrongdoing.
Well, I say it all the time. Right now, Larry Snelling does not have the authority to fire a police officer. He can only make a recommendation to a police board. And during my tenure, there was a time when 75% of my termination recommendations were overturned by the police board. And I'm looking at these people like, wait, weren't you appointed by our mayor? And I would talk to the mayor, and he kind of put them in line. If I'm trying to fire bad cops, you're going to prevent me from doing that? What are you talking about?
You're right.
And they don't understand police culture. They're civilians, right? Some of them are there for the right reasons. Some of them are there for the wrong reasons. Look at what they did, and I'm going to bring this up all the time. I'm sorry. The Adam Toledo shooting. What they did to that police officer is unconscionable. And nobody knows what he was going through. I happen to know because I took the time to reach out to him, which I still do today when officers get into shootings. I call Chicago police officers when I can find their number, and I call them up to see how they're doing. And I can't tell you how many times they've said to me, you're the only person who's called me. But this guy, in that shooting, and we all know about the shooting, 13-year-old, 2 o'clock in the morning, with the gangbanger, firing shots, like picked up on ShotSpotter. Oh, let's get rid of ShotSpotter, and let's get rid of foot pursuits too. That's how we fix that problem. That guy got cleared by the state's attorney. He got cleared by the Firearms Discharge Review Board. And the head of the police board decided that he wanted to do a disciplinary action on him for some minor discipline thing.
Would you want to do your job then? Would you want to do your job based on how that police officer was treated? And that's just internally. This is not even talking about...
This is in the age where all they're talking about is officer wellness.
Exactly.
No.
You're right. And suicide rate continues to go up. They start talking about this alternative with electronic monitoring, like that's going to save the criminal justice system and people being incarcerated.
There was a belief that it was a real system out there that they were monitoring people.
You know what?
But it's never actually.
Is it? I believe, and you might know more than I do about this, but the electronic monitoring, you get 2 days off a week, 48 hours. You can go do whatever you want. Well, guess what we did? We were following individuals that were doing burglaries across 16 counties, and we ended up catching them, and now they're being prosecuted. But we made sure that they were prosecuted in Will County. So what ended up happening was when they were under two-day hiatus where they could go wherever they want on electronic monitoring, they were robbing, stealing, and pillaging. And it was an embarrassment. And he goes, well, as long as I get back in time, he goes, I'm not.
Hey, Tommy, you got to figure out how to make this negative into a positive.
Okay, I'm trying.
It's
not 36 hours. You're
right. Open up a store, right? Buy gold, sell holsters during the time when they're out, right? And see what happens.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
I want to get back to Tom was mentioning the pretrial release and how the revolving door of the arrestees. So this is a microcosm of how we do things in Illinois. They lifted the entire bail reform, and in the Safety Act, it wasn't effective for 2 years. So in that 2 years, they lifted it from a New Jersey model, and the integral part of the New Jersey model was there was a
I didn't ruin New Jersey. It was like that when I got there.
He said all three urbans.
But there was an algorithm predictive model that a judge could look at, and it had a lot of factors, and it's a learning AI model that says, what's the likelihood of this guy recidivism? What's the likelihood of him not appearing in court? And they needed to develop that tool, and that tool tells the judge whether to incarcerate him or not awaiting trial. In Illinois, they looked at a few different instruments. They could never come up with one, and so they went ahead with bail reform without the instrument. So now the judges and the state attorneys are flying blind. They don't have that tool, and so they have nothing to say, let's hold this guy. So we went ahead and ran this bail reform without having all the tools ready. They should have put it off. They should have got the tool in place. If they get a tool, it'll work a lot better. But that's how they do things in Illinois. Why Illinois allows these bills to pass is because that other states don't. Is they allow shell bills to pass out of committee and through one chamber, and then all comprehensive bills in the last 10 years have been dumped into shell bills at the end.
Correct.
So they They don't go through a committee hearing. They don't go through public discourse to try to say, is this good for Illinois or not good for Illinois? They all get put into shell bills and then they get passed and then they get fixed after they're passed. So it's not a proper model for changing legislation. Yeah, that's what's really missing with the bail reform is the judges are making decisions with all the information that they could have or they need to make proper decisions on who to detain or not detain. And then it's hard to get any information from the court on things like appearance rates. I've heard 2 or 3 times that appearance rates haven't changed after bail reform, but I don't know if that's accurate or not because we haven't seen the data.
We're getting FTA warrants all the time for people not showing up to court. We had 2 of them today. We had them last week, and we're getting constant failure to appear warrants that are being issued for individuals who are not showing up to court after they're getting grabbed. You start talking about we're talking about what the causes of crime and violence and gangs and different things you're talking about. And I'm going to say this is previous. Prior to Eileen Burke, it was a revolving door in bond court where they would not prosecute any drug cases. We were doing hand-to-hand buy drug cases over the last couple of years prior to this administration.
One of the most dangerous things a police officer can do.
And Mark's done a ton of them. I've done a ton of them, and we have our own guys doing these hand-to-hand buys, and they rolled it out of court. Hand-to-hand buy on video, everything, and got in the bond court. Dismissed. So, and what do drugs bring? They're guns, gangs, violence, money. I mean, it's just, and when you are not incarcerating these individuals for all these narcotic cases who are on drugs is a failure. And if you look at it, but now you're looking at like the seriousness of fentanyl and all these different problems that are occurring. I mean, there's no bite to the dog. We have a toothless dog. And what happens? We create more victims. And I got on this job to reduce the amount of victims that are out there. And right now, it is in the worst shape I think it's ever been.
I don't disagree. And there's a couple of things that more and more examples just keep coming up. First of all, the largest police department in the country to achieve accreditation is the Chicago Police Department. Okay. And why did we do that? Because it reduces liability. It gives you the gold standard for your policies and so on and so forth. So why is there a monitor when we already got the gold standard? Okay. Just think about that for a second. Cottage industry, somebody's making money off of it. Okay. But here's 2 things about that. First of all, when a police officer in Chicago now unholsters their weapon, that's considered a use of force, and they have to do a report, right? So somebody tells me about this, and I'm like, so what's the big deal? Do the report. But it's being monitored so that if you take your gun out a whole bunch of times,
Exactly.
they're going to say, you are a violent, racist police
They don't look
officer.
at where you work, what district you're in, what crimes you're responding to. Nothing.
But think about the insanity
I agree.
that a police officer is putting themselves at a disadvantage. You know, I'm looking at some of the AI stuff that's being produced right now for training, and it's very important, and it's definitely going to be the future. But I'm looking at a scenario last week, and it's a guy he's in a car. It's a car stop. He's got the top down. It's a bright sunny day. That's not a car stop in Chicago. In Chicago, the windows are up. They're all tinted.
Yes.
And the weed is coming out of the car like crazy. So you can't even see what's inside the car, yet you're troubled to take your gun and protect yourself all at the same time. Think about what that's doing to these officers.
I agree.
And then here's my last one, and I'm actually going to ask you guys to just talk for the rest of this because this one, I'm not going to give up on it. Tell me how the standard for stop, question, and frisk became population demographics when the Supreme Court of the United States said articulable, reasonable suspicion. Correct. Mark, how does that happen? The Supreme Court says this, Department of Justice and ACLU says that, and that's the standard we're held to, not a Supreme Court decision.
They wanted to just get this thing done and through and over with. And I remember when that vote was going on, I said, there's no way this is going to get approved. And I'm watching this, and I was in awe about the lack of courage by our state legislators. Some who I know, who I will not talk to this day, who voted for that.
You know what I'd like those legislators to do? Is explain to Krystal Rivera's 10-year-old daughter, I believe, why this guy is going to be out in 2 years and she's never going to see her mom again.
In Illinois, the traffic stop study data is being cooked. For 15 years, they had Northwestern University, who is a prestigious research firm, doing that. You know, now they've hired 2 guys that work out of their basement in Seattle that are looking at the results of the traffic stop study, and they're changing the standard as to fit what they want the study to say. So in Lemont, they may look at they may compare my traffic stops to Lemont population data. Next door in Lockport, that doesn't work so good because they have a unincorporated area next by, so they use regional data. That doesn't work at all in Joliet, so they throw that out, and they use traffic crash reports, but only if it's a one-man car.
Keep moving the goalposts.
And they changed it this year. I just saw the study come out the other day. We've got a white paper about the traffic study, but there's so many things about the data that is just you can't trust anymore. Depending on it, the recidivism rate, it's all about rearrest data. But you know, the person that's out may have committed 15 crimes by the time he's arrested.
They are.
Correct. And we all know, we all see what's happening, but you know, the data is being fed to us, and it's being fed to the politicians. And then there's always 2 sides of data going. So when you talk to the politicians, they say, well, we got this study that says this, and you guys say this. And so nobody knows how to convince the politicians about which data is accurate and what they should rely on. You know, it's a hard job for them. I know you disparage them, but it's a difficult job for the legislators right now.
I feel terrible for them.
Yeah, I know you do.
Yeah. People ask me if I'm going to run for mayor again, and I tell them that it was the most distasteful thing I've done in my life. But you guys both have advanced degrees, and I started mine. I never got to finish because I started it when I became deputy commissioner in New York. It's a little bit busy. I couldn't really do it. But I had the opportunity to be exposed to some of the most amazing criminologists in the world. George Kelly became a good friend of mine. Tracy Mears, Tom Tyler, David Kennedy, all these various criminologists who work with you to develop the theories. They become practitioners by working and partnering with police departments. And I learned so much from them as they learned from me, all at the same time. And that's why we were able to craft strategies to reduce crime, reduce complaints against officers, reduce police-related shootings, and increase citizen satisfaction all at the same time. But why don't they ask us? Why do they put these things together and say, here, what do you think? Isn't it good? Oh, no, we're not changing it. We just want to check a box and say, yeah, we spoke to Marc Maton. He's genius. Head of the Illinois Police Chiefs Organization.
Police, yeah. No, I'd be interested to find out who their subject matter experts were when that was just built together.
That's a question that I want answered.
Yeah.
There was no, it happened over, in one day. There was no.
Well, somebody wrote 752 pages.
No, they just took a bunch of independent
telephone books.
Yeah, bills that were already sitting there.
That's true.
And they stuck them in there. And that's why you had originally had conflicts within the bill. Where one section to the
one thing, and it says
one section calls them confidential sources. One calls them anonymous sources. You still have conflicts with other parts of the statute to this day, and I'm almost afraid to say this and have a plaintiff's attorney hear it. But to this day, they've never
edit this. They edit their data.
They've never
bad Mark. I got you. Don't worry about it.
They've never added
my show
an exemption for body cameras to the eavesdropping statute. So every time you turn that body camera on audio, you're illegally eavesdropping. And we've brought that up several times. We've run our own bills for that, and it just never was on. And they tell us, well, no state's attorney will ever prosecute a policeman for something like that. Well, but they may sue a police officer in a situation for that. But, I think that will be done at some point, but that's still never been done because all bills have to go through a process of the Legislative Review Bureau where they check all those things. Does this require a change somewhere else in the statute? And to their, in their defense, they didn't have time to do that. This was just, dumped on. I don't even think they formatted it. It just went into a bill on a show bill, and it was passed.
They were afraid of the pushback. They were afraid people like yourself with the Chiefs of Police Association would read this, and lobbyists would get involved, and they wanted to just get this thing done and through and over with. And I remember when that vote was going on, I said, "There's no way this is going to get approved." And I'm watching this, and I was in awe about the lack of courage by our state legislators, some who I know, who I will not talk to this day, who voted for that, I really thought were intelligent individuals.
Yeah, and I don't think they voted for that. They voted because of the deal that was made for the voter next day. Yeah. They knew what the stakes were, and I think some of them regret it. But a lot of those were vocal to help us at least get the changes that we made because it was a very bad bill, and for the most part, we've learned to live with a lot of the sections of it, and have been able to fix the most onerous parts of that bill. It's not, we're not done yet, but I think some of the most egregious problems, the original use of force, you had to make a split-second decision whether somebody had the potential to be apprehended at some later date before you could use deadly force. I mean, there were things in there. There were a lot of really bad things.
And they never defined what reasonable was. They never defined what the actions were that you saw. If a reasonable, they didn't define a lot of those different things on the use of force for police officers. And you're talking about split-second decisions on life or death. And it is, and I do believe in the concept that gets repeated back to me a million times, death by body cam. They're so concerned about what's going to be viewed, what's going to be seen. Oh my God, the gun was at their hip. And do I have to wait till they raise it now? Do I have to, it's deplorable the way this situation is. And nobody's pushing for police officers to shoot anybody or do anything. But my God, go home at night.
Yeah, and that use of force section, I mean, I don't know if we can do some shout outs, but, Bob Berlin and the DuPage County State's Attorney and Jamie Mosser, they were just stars with convincing all the other attorneys in the room to make some of those changes. And they made a very bad bill into a bad bill.
That's quite an accomplishment because I'm married to an attorney and I can't convince her of anything. I haven't won an argument in years.
The negotiations over this bill, made us realize that we always have to have attorneys in the room on our side when we negotiate these bills. And since 2021, we've done that.
Let me give you a horrible story about this. 2 weeks ago, we had an individual that was committing burglaries. We had him on video. We had a task force that was out we're working prostitution and we're working property crimes. This individual was out, again, another individual out on home monitoring, but out on the catch and release, does a home invasion, steals 2 guns, gets away with it. We end up apprehending him, going to a drug house to buy drugs, and this individual should have been incarcerated, and none of these crimes should have occurred. And it's My biggest problem is when I hear of an individual that's shot, killed, police officer killed, and the first thing that goes in my head always is, I want to know what that guy's criminal history was. Should he have been incarcerated at the time this crime occurred? And because if they were, this crime wouldn't have occurred. That armed robbery wouldn't have occurred. That sexual assault wouldn't have occurred. It's devastating, and that's the problem.
But you know what? Elected officials like to say that they're accountable because they have to get voted back in. Well, how do they do that? They curry favor, right? You're right. That's how. I don't even want to talk about gun laws, right? Because that gets people too hot. But it's the same thing. And you know what I'd like those legislators to do? Is explain to Krystal Rivera's 10-year-old daughter, I believe, why this guy is going to be out in 2 years and she's never going to see her mom. I think he'll do 2 years. Well, I'm making up a number.
No,
I'm hopeful.
They'll get 2 years, but they're going to get 50% out day for a day. I mean, it's check.
Yeah, because he's going to have his multiple picture.
Yeah.
So, well, we filled up this hour pretty quickly. You guys did a great job. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to close like I always do, which is I still believe, I am absolutely convinced that there's very few things more noble that an individual could do with their life than to become a police officer. You could say doctor and go to, some third world country. You could say be a priest, a rabbi, an imam. Great, okay? But we make a difference in people's lives. And we're doing it under the worst circumstances right now. And unfortunately, the right is too far right and the left is too far left. And we're kind of stuck in the middle, right? So hopefully we could start working together in this country and stop what's going on. Because, like I said, as we sit here, we hear the chants outside for the immigration reform. Well, I think that wraps it up for tonight. Guys, Mark, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Pleasure, brother. I forgot to mention, they're both musicians, very accomplished. Mark plays guitar. Tommy's a fantastic bagpiper. Can anybody out there tell a difference? Yeah. But he actually is. So they have a lot of things on their plate and 2 great careers here and two wonderful friends for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.